Hey, what's going on everyone? Today we're going to continue through our tutorial series of setting up a Neurovine doser on a batch tank. In this video we're going to actually go through all the steps that you need to enter in the menu so that your system is up and running. So if you haven't had the chance already, make sure that you watch the videos on calibrating the sensors and calibrating the pumps, setting up the pumps, and also setting up your nutrient bottles. So that's going to be necessary before we continue into the tutorial. So what you're going to have at the very beginning is you're just going to have your device. It's not going to show anything on the screen. And that's actually, it's going to get populated once you calibrate all the sensors. So the first thing you're actually going to want to do once you start using your device is you're going to want to go into the menu and then go to Setup and then Connect to Wi-Fi. So it's going to show you're not connected. So we're going to go ahead and click Set up Wi-Fi. So now we're going to choose our network name, and then we're going to enter our password, and then we're going to wait for it to connect. All right, so now we're connected to our Wi-Fi network. The next step is connect it to the actual cloud. So we're going to click on our cloud button, and then it's going to tell us we got to log into our Neurovine cloud account, click Get New Device, and then Get Token. So I'm going to click Next. And then let's go over to the web app so that we can actually create this token. Okay, so now we're at cloud.neurovine.com and we're going to log into our account. Now that we're logged in, we're going to click this Add Device button. And it's going to ask us to name our device, put the room, and then set the mixing time and system size. So we'll just name this device Batch. And the device room, we'll just call it Front Office. And then for the mixing time, so the mixing time is basically how much time after dosing you want to allow the nutrients to get all mixed up before it decides to take another sensor reading and potentially do another dose. So that's going to depend a lot on how your system's set up, how fast things get mixed up. And so for our system, we're going to put a mixing time of just 3 minutes. For the system size, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's just how many gallons are in your tank. Our tank is 55 gallons, so we're going to put 55. And then we're going to generate our token. Okay, so now we've got the token. It says 244655. So now we're going to go back to the Alchemist and enter that token. All right, so we've got our system connected to the cloud. Now what we want to do is go ahead and put in the rest of our settings. So we're going to go over here to Reservoir. We had the size where we entered into the cloud 55 gallons, and then our mixing time is 3 minutes. I'd also recommend putting a dosing delay of just 1 minute. That basically means that it'll do like two checks for the EC. So it'll first check the EC if it goes out of range, then it'll wait a minute, and then it'll check again. And this is just like a little bit of redundancy to ensure that it doesn't have any like false doses. Also, we've got dosing mode. So because we're using a batch tank, we're going to click on dosing mode, and then we're going to set it to batch tank. So we've got our reservoir settings figured out. Now we're going to head to the rules. So we're going to click on rules, and we're going to set up our EC rule. And we put in the value of the EC that we're looking for. So in this case, we're looking for an EC of 2. And then we're going to choose which pumps that we want to use for the rule. If you haven't set up your pumps already, please watch the video on calibrating the pumps and getting that all connected. So once you have that all done, we click Next. And then we're going to choose which pumps we want to use. So let's choose A. We're going to have 6 mils per gallon of A. We're going to have 6 mils per gallon of B. And then we're going to have 2 of CalMag. And then we'll have 2 of Hypo. And then we'll click Done. So we've created our rule, but we want to actually do a calibration dose. So we're going to actually click back on the rule again, and then we're going to click on calibration dose. And basically what we're trying to do is dose a certain amount of the system where we don't want to like overdo it, but we want to make a nice healthy dose, because that's how the system is going to learn. like basically the amount that it adds, how much does the EC change by? So it's like if I add X milliliters of nutrients, the system will change by Y, right? And so say we add X, we expect it to change by Y, but it actually changes by like Y over 2, like half of Y. Then the system realizes, hey, I actually need to add twice as much of X to achieve the result of Y. But anyway, you don't need to know too much about that. All you need to do is basically just click next, and then you just enter a fraction of the tank. So in our case, it's 55 gallons. So if we wanted to say do half of that, we could say let's do 25 gallons. So I'm going to click on 25, and then I'm going to click next. And it's just showing me before it does any dosing, how much of A is it going to add, how much of B is it going to add, how much CalMag, and how much hypo. So before we do our calibration dose, it's important that our reservoir is completely filled up and the volume is not changing. The reason this is so important is because we want to make sure that the system understands the relationship between how much nutrients it adds and the change in EC or pH. So we're now ready to dose. We just turned our pump on, so that's why you can hear that noise. You want to make sure that the pump is on, and you want to make sure that your ball valves are opened and there's that nice circulation loop. So now we're going to click next and let it rip. Now our EC should be calibrated, so now we can click done. And what we want to do is we want to check basically how the calibration went. And so we would go back to our rules and we'll click on EC. So now we can see there's this dosing const. And this const just basically, it's part of like our dosing formula. And it's basically just like the amount of milliliters of solution that you need to add to increase 1 gallon by 1 EC. But again, that's not something you really need to understand. It's just something that you can kind of keep aware of. And say, for example, you notice that your system's not dosing like as much as you would think it should, then you can very carefully change this number. So you see this is like 0.009. So I could go ahead and I can change this to like let's say like 0.01 or something like that. But I'm not going to change it right now. But just as an example, you could increase it by a little bit. Just make sure that you know what the value is before you change it, because you could really dose a lot because look how small this number is. If you increase it by 10, like if you make it like say you made it like 0.1, then it would be like over 10 times this amount. So that'd be insane. So be very careful with that. If you ever do feel like the system is not calibrated properly and you want to try again, you can always just do another calibration dose and go from there. All right, so we've done our calibration dose. The dose did not bring us all the way up to our desired EC. So we are going to want to do a pH calibration dose, but what I would recommend is first, let's finish dosing the EC with the rule, because that's going to lower the pH quite a bit, and we do want to make sure that when we're doing our calibration for the pH, it's relatively in the range that we're going to be dosing in. So now that we've done this, one other thing I would like to mention, I think this is pretty important, is the max step. And so what the max step means is that this is the greatest goal per dose that we'll ever try to do at once. So what does that mean? Well, say our goal was to go to, say, like 2 EC, right? And our max step is just 0.1. That means it's going to try to do like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, et cetera, until it gets all the way up to 2. So with our mixing time of 3 minutes, that can end up taking quite a while, like several hours. And sometimes we want this thing to be done more quickly. So what we can do is we can set our max step. Let's change this to say 0.5. Now we don't have to worry too much about it, the max step overshooting, because it's the maximum step. So if the system is calibrated properly, then it knows how much to add to achieve a certain amount. And also the goal, it's never going to try to hit the target on the first dose. So say like, we're only, say like 0.2 away and the max step is 0.5. It's not going to dose like 0.5. It's going to dose actually a little bit less than 0.2. Make sure that that's good, and then it'll do one last dose, and then it'll be good. So, so we're going to leave it 2. Activation is 1.98, means that if it's less than 1.98, it's going to go to 2. So it's going to really dose pretty often. It's going to take, not going to take much for this thing to keep it, you know, dialed in. All right, so we're done with this. So we're going to go back. Well, we're actually going to, we got the rule locked in. So we're going to go to our home, and then where it says inactive, we're going to push inactive, and then we're going to click on dosing. So now our EC is pretty much done. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into our pH. We're going to create the pH rules, and then we're going to do the calibration constant for that as well. So I'm going to take this out of dosing mode, go to inactive, and then I'm going to go into the system. I'm going to go to rules, and we're doing pH down. Like our pH is high, so this is really all we need for now. So let's say our goal for the pH is to be at 6. So then we choose which pump goes with the pH. So we click next, and then we're going to click pH down. And so the rule has now been created, but once again we want to go ahead and edit it a little bit. So I'm going to click on the pH down. The activation desired, that's fine. And then the max step, I'd recommend also increasing this. Like, let's have it go by 0.5, so that if it's like at 7, it'll go to like 6.5, and then it'll go to 6. But again, as it gets closer to the target, it's going to be a little bit more careful so it doesn't overdose. So let's just say it's 0.5. So then we've got this like crazy dosing constant. So I guess this must have been left in the system from before. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a calibration dose, and it's just going to ask us to enter the amount of milliliters of pH solution that we want to dose. And so we're going to choose how much we're putting in. So if you're familiar with how much solution you need to add, then it's going to be easier for you to do. And so the reason we say we should aim for a 0.3 or more pH change is because the more it changes by, the more accurate the const is going to be. So we click next. So let's just say we're going to put in 20 mils. So we'll click OK. It's going to do 20 mils of solution. And then it's going to get mixed up. So the mixing is just what our mixing time is. So I just showed you how to calibrate the EC and the pH. And this is really useful for doing a batch tank. And the reason this is good for batch tanks is because a lot of time water is being added there, and then the system's going to be dosing, and the water is being added. So like even though nutrients are being added to the tank, it's getting diluted at a faster rate. So it actually, the machine thinks the EC went down even though it added nutrients. And so it's going to have a hard time learning how much it needs to add. And that's why we did the calibration dose with a constant water volume. So for a recirculating system where the plants are in the water and the water level isn't really changing that much, the learning mode is much better because it's very simple, and the system will constantly be adjusting how much it needs to dose throughout the life cycle of the plants. What we can do though is if we wanted to have that learning mode for the batch tank, you could have it where you set it the first time. You could just leave it make sure you leave the volume constant. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the menu. We'll go to Setup, Reservoir, and then instead of Batch Tank, we're going to click on Dosing Mode and Recirculating. So then we're going to go to our home, and our EC is already on point, so we know it's just going to be doing the pH. So I'm going to set it to dosing. And when we come back, we're going to see that the pH is at the level 6. So now we're back at our batch tank, and we're looking at the Alchemist, and we see that our EC has hit 2 and our pH has hit 6.0. And so that means that the system has been calibrated really well using the recirculating mode. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the menu, and we're going to set it back to batch mode. And the reason batch mode is better for batches is because it'll just dose a little bit faster. and it doesn't need to learn. And so what's good about that is, say you have, the volume of the system is changing, it doesn't affect the way that the system doses anymore. So basically, once you've got this calibration done, it's going to be accurate in this other mode. So what we do is we click on monitoring, set it to an active. Then I'm going to go into the menu, and then I'm going to go to setup, reservoir, click on dosing mode, set it to batch tank, and then all you got to do is go back to the home, and then we can set it back to dosing. And so that means next time that it needs to dose, it's going to dose using the batch mode. It's going to be super accurate, and it's going to be awesome.